The house was silent after the fight, but silence didn't mean peace. Emily sat curled up on the couch, her hands wrapped protectively around her belly, her heart still pounding from Jason's outburst. She could hear him pacing in the bedroom, opening and slamming drawers, muttering curses under his breath. Every sound made her body tense. She knew that tonight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Hours dragged by like days. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, then 1, then 2. Emily tried to rest, but every time she closed her eyes she saw Jason's face twisted in rage, his words echoing in her head. That baby ruined everything. She whispered softly to her unborn child, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Mommy's here. Mommy will protect you." But deep down, she wasn't sure she could keep that promise. Suddenly, the front door creaked open. Jason stormed back inside, reeking of alcohol. His shirt was stained, his eyes bloodshot. He had gone to Vanessa's bar, and now he was worse than ever. He stumbled into the living room, glaring at Emily. "You're still here?" he slurred. "Still sitting there like some helpless little victim? Pathetic." Emily stood slowly, her legs trembling. "Jason, please, I don't want to fight anymore. Just go to bed." But Jason didn't listen. He grabbed his truck keys from the counter and waved them in the air. "You think you can make me look like a fool? At the restaurant? In front of Vanessa? No one humiliates me, Emily. No one." Emily's stomach tightened with dread. "Jason, please, don't do this." He laughed bitterly. "Do what? Show you who's in charge? Teach you a lesson?" He staggered toward the door, then turned back, his eyes wild. "Maybe I should just end this right now." Emily's breath caught. "End what?" Jason smirked, then stormed outside into the driveway. The roar of his truck engine split the night air. Emily's blood ran cold. She rushed to the front door, watching in horror as the headlights blazed across the yard. "Jason, stop," she screamed, stepping onto the porch. "Please stop. I'm carrying your child." But Jason was too far gone. Fueled by rage, alcohol, and Vanessa's poison, he slammed his foot on the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, tires screeching against the pavement. Emily froze for a split second, then stumbled backward, her arms instinctively wrapping around her stomach. The blinding headlights rushed closer, faster, until there was no escape. The impact threw her to the ground. A sharp, searing pain tore through her body. She screamed, her voice breaking into the night, then silence. Blood pooled beneath her, dark and spreading. Neighbors rushed out of their houses, their cries filling the air. "Call 911, she's pregnant, hurry." Emily's vision blurred. The world spun as she gasped for air. Her trembling hand reached toward her stomach, but she could barely feel anything. Her lips formed the words, "My baby," before everything went black. What no one knew in that horrific moment was that Emily's nightmare had only begun, and the betrayal that followed would cut deeper than the truck's crushing blow. The ambulance screamed through the night, red lights flashing across the dark streets of Dallas. Inside, Emily lay strapped to a stretcher, her face pale, her body trembling. Blood stained her dress, soaking the sheets beneath her. Paramedics worked frantically, their voices tense, their hands moving quickly. "BP dropping. We're losing her," one shouted. Emily drifted in and out of consciousness. The world was a blur of flashing lights, cold hands, and the metallic smell of blood. She tried to speak, but her lips barely moved. In her fading mind, one thought repeated over and over. "My baby. Please save my baby." By the time they reached the hospital, Emily was barely holding on. Doctors rushed her into surgery, their voices echoing in the sterile white halls. Nurses swarmed, machines beeped, and a mask was placed over her face. Emily's body went limp as the world went dark. Hours passed. The night bled into morning. Finally, Emily's eyes fluttered open. The harsh hospital lights blinded her. She blinked, confused, her throat dry, her body heavy with pain. Slowly, she turned her head and saw a doctor standing beside her bed, his expression grave. "Emily?" His voice was gentle but heavy. "You're very lucky to be alive. We managed to repair your leg, though it's badly broken. It will take a long time to heal." Emily's breath caught. She didn't care about her leg. Her trembling lips formed the question she feared most. "My baby?" The doctor paused. His eyes softened with pity. He shook his head. "I'm sorry. The trauma was too severe. We couldn't save your baby." The words struck harder than the truck ever could. Emily's heart shattered into pieces. A scream tore from her chest, raw and agonizing. She clutched her stomach, tears pouring down her face. "No, no, my baby." Her cries echoed through the sterile room, so painful that even the nurses had to look away. In that moment, Emily wanted to die. She had endured Jason's cruelty, the humiliation, the abuse, all for the hope of holding her child. And now, that hope was gone. The future she dreamed of vanished in an instant. As she sobbed, the door creaked open. Jason stood there, hands in his pockets, his face blank. For a moment, Emily's heart leapt. Maybe he came to comfort her. Maybe he would finally care. But then, without hesitation, Jason stepped forward and signed a paper the nurse handed him. "What is that?" Emily whispered, her voice weak. The nurse hesitated. "It's a refusal of payment. He's declining to cover your medical bills." Emily stared at Jason, her heart collapsing all over again. How could you?" Jason shrugged, his eyes cold. "You're not my problem anymore." Then he turned his back and walked away. Emily broke into sobs so deep they shook her broken body. She felt abandoned, shattered, alone in a sterile room, with nothing left but grief. And as if fate wanted to pierce her heart even deeper, the next visitor was not a friend, but Vanessa. Ready to twist the knife with cruel words Emily could barely survive. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of machines. Emily lay there, weak and pale, staring blankly at the ceiling. Her body was broken, her leg wrapped in bandages, but the deeper wound was invisible, the emptiness inside her where her baby once lived. Her sobs had faded into silence, leaving her hollow, drained of everything but pain. The door opened slowly. For a moment, Emily thought maybe the doctor had returned, or perhaps, against all odds, Jason had come back with a trace of remorse. But instead, the sound of high heels clicked against the linoleum floor, sharp and deliberate. It was Vanessa. Emily's heart sank. She tried to sit up, but her body was too weak. Vanessa strolled in confidently, her red dress hugging her figure, her lips curled into a cruel smile. She carried herself like she owned the room, like she owned Jason, and now even Emily's misery. "Well, well," Vanessa said sweetly, though her tone dripped with venom. "Look at you, poor little Emily, lying here like some pathetic victim." Emily's throat tightened. She whispered, her voice hoarse, "Why are you here?" Vanessa tilted her head, pretending to think. "Oh, I just wanted to see the mess Jason told me about. And honestly, it's even worse than I imagined. You look broken." She smirked, stepping closer to the bed. "But then again, you always were." Tears burned Emily's eyes. She wanted to scream, to tell Vanessa to leave, but she had no strength left. Vanessa leaned down, her perfume overwhelming, her voice low but sharp like a knife. "Jason doesn't need you anymore. He has me. He doesn't want some weak little housewife who can't even keep a baby alive." The words struck Emily like daggers. She gasped, her chest tightening, the tears spilling freely now. Vanessa straightened, satisfied with the damage she had done. "You thought a baby would tie him to you?" Vanessa sneered. "How pathetic. Jason is mine now. He belongs with someone strong, someone who can give him the life he deserves." Emily shook her head weakly, sobbing. You don't know what love is. You're just using him." Vanessa laughed coldly. "And what do you call what you had? Love? Please, Jason told me everything. You're nothing but dead weight to him. And now, without the baby, you're even less than that." The cruelty in her words was unbearable. Emily turned her face away, wishing she could disappear, wishing she could vanish into the sheets and escape the nightmare. Vanessa finally straightened her posture, smoothed her dress, and headed toward the door. But before leaving, she turned one last time. "Get used to being alone, Emily. Jason is mine now, and there's nothing you can do about it." The door clicked shut, leaving the room colder than before. Emily broke into sobs so violent they shook her fragile body. The beeping of the machines quickened with her heartbeat, but no nurse, no doctor, no family came to comfort her. She was truly alone. Or so she thought. Because in the darkest hour, when Emily believed she had no one left in this world, an unexpected figure was about to walk through that door. A man who would change the course of her life forever. The night dragged on in the hospital, each second stretching into an eternity. Emily lay motionless, her tears finally dried on her cheeks, leaving behind hollow eyes. The words Vanessa had thrown at her still echoed, cutting deeper than any wound. She had lost her baby, her husband had abandoned her, even her dignity had been ripped away. She felt like there was nothing left to live for. The hallway outside was quiet, save for the distant shuffle of nurses. Emily closed her eyes, wishing she could escape the nightmare. But then the door creaked open again. At first she braced herself, fearing Jason or Vanessa had returned to torment her further. But when she lifted her gaze, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't Jason. It wasn't Vanessa. It was Michael Reynolds. He looked different from the man she remembered years ago, but his presence was unmistakable. He wore a tailored suit, his posture confident, his eyes sharp but kind. The lines on his face spoke of experience, struggle, and triumph. He was no longer the struggling man she once knew. He was someone powerful now. "Emily," he said softly, stepping closer to the bed. His voice carried warmth, a kind of gentleness she hadn't heard in so long. Emily blinked in disbelief. "Michael? Is it really you?" He nodded, pulling a chair beside her bed. "It's me. I heard what happened, and I had to come." Her heart raced. Memories flooded back, years earlier, when Michael was nothing more than a desperate man searching for work. Emily had helped him then. She had offered him a meal, encouraged him, and even connected him with a small job at the cafe where she worked. At the time, it seemed like nothing. But to Michael, it had been everything. "I never forgot what you did for me," Michael continued, his eyes steady on hers. "Back then, when no one believed in me, you did. You showed me kindness when I had nothing. That kindness helped me get back on my feet. I built something out of my life, Emily, and I promised myself, if I ever had the chance to repay you, I would." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but this time they weren't just from sorrow. They carried the faintest glimmer of hope. "Michael, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied firmly. "I see what he did to you. I see how broken you are. But you're not alone anymore. I'll cover your treatment. I'll make sure your leg heals. I'll make sure you stand again, not just on your feet, but in your life." Emily trembled. For months she had felt nothing but despair, but now, sitting beside her was someone who believed she still had value, someone who remembered her kindness and wanted to return it. Michael reached for her hand gently. "You saved me once, Emily. Now it's my turn to save you." And for the first time since the nightmare began, Emily felt a spark of hope, but she had no idea how completely Michael's return would change her destiny. The morning sun filtered weakly through the blinds of the hospital room, casting pale stripes of light across Emily's face. She had barely slept. The pain in her leg throbbed relentlessly, but it was nothing compared to the ache in her chest. Losing her baby had carved a hole so deep inside her that she felt she might never recover. Michael sat quietly by her side, a cup of coffee in his hand, his suit jacket draped over the chair. He hadn't left since he arrived. His presence filled the room with something Emily hadn't felt in months: safety. "Emily," he said gently, breaking the silence, "I know you're hurting more than words can ever express. I can't imagine the pain of losing your child, but I want you to know something. You're not alone anymore." Emily's lips quivered. She stared down at her hands, twisting the thin hospital blanket between her fingers. "I don't know if I can ever be whole again, Michael. My baby is gone. Jason doesn't care if I live or die. I have nothing left." Michael leaned forward, his eyes steady, his voice firm but tender. "That's not true. You still have yourself, Emily. And you deserve to heal. You deserve a life where you're not broken, not used, not humiliated. You deserve to stand again." Her eyes filled with tears. "But my leg, the doctor said it may never heal properly. They said I might never walk without pain." Michael's jaw tightened, determination flashing in his eyes. "Then we'll find the best doctors in the country. I'll take you anywhere. New York, Chicago, even overseas if I have to. Money isn't the problem. The only thing that matters is that you get your life back." Emily shook her head in disbelief. "Why would you do all this for me?" He smiled softly. "Because you once believed in me when no one else did. You gave me food when I was starving. You helped me find work when I had nothing. You reminded me I was worth something. I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to repay you, I would. And now I do." For the first time in weeks, Emily's tears carried something different. Hope. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing quietly, overwhelmed by Michael's sincerity. Michael reached out and gently touched her arm. "Let me help you, Emily. Let me be the one to carry some of this burden. You don't have to fight alone anymore." Emily lowered her hands, her eyes red but shining with fragile light. "I don't know if I'm strong enough, You don't have to be strong right now, Michael said firmly. That's what I'm here for, and together we'll make you strong again. For the first time since the accident, Emily allowed herself to breathe without the weight of despair crushing her chest. What she didn't yet realize was that Michael's promise wasn't just about healing her body. It was the beginning of a journey that would rebuild her soul and give her the strength to face Jason one last time. The hospital weeks dragged on like a slow march through endless pain. Emily's leg had been broken in multiple places. The doctors had inserted metal pins, and every movement sent fire shooting through her body. She spent most days staring out the window, the world outside moving forward while she remained trapped in stillness. But Michael never left her side. He visited daily, bringing books, flowers, even soft blankets to keep her warm. More than that, he brought determination. "This isn't the end for you, Emily," he reminded her. "This is the beginning, and I'll make sure of it." When the hospital released her, Michael insisted she move into a rehabilitation center he had personally arranged. It wasn't just any center. It was one of the best in Texas, with state-of-the-art equipment and a team of experts dedicated to her recovery. Emily hesitated at first, ashamed of needing help, but Michael's steady encouragement guided her forward. The first day of therapy was brutal. Emily gripped the parallel bars, her arms trembling as she tried to put weight on her injured leg. The pain shot up like a blade, and she cried out, collapsing back into the wheelchair. "I can't do this," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Michael crouched beside her, his voice calm but firm. "Yes, you can. You've already survived worse. You're stronger than you think." Emily shook her head. "I lost my baby. I lost everything. I'm broken, Michael. Nothing will ever fix that." He placed a hand gently on hers. "You're not broken. You're healing. And healing takes time. You have to trust the process. You have to trust yourself." Day after day, Emily tried again. Some days she managed a single step. Other days she fell back into the chair, her tears mixing with sweat. But Michael was always there, clapping, encouraging, reminding her that progress wasn't about perfection. It was about persistence. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, Emily began to change. Her body grew stronger, her posture straighter, her eyes brighter. Each painful step became a small victory, a reminder that she was still alive, still fighting. One morning, after weeks of practice, Emily stood at the bars and managed to take 3 full steps without collapsing. The therapist cheered, but it was Michael's smile that made her heart swell. "See?" he said proudly. "I told you, you're stronger than you think." For the first time, Emily felt a flicker of pride instead of shame. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was rebuilding. At night, lying in her room, Emily still cried for the baby she had lost. That grief would never fully leave her. But alongside the sorrow, something new began to grow, a fragile hope that life could still hold meaning, that maybe her story wasn't over yet. What Emily didn't know was that her recovery was only the first step, and soon she would face Jason again, not as a broken victim, but as a woman rising from the ashes. Months of sweat, pain, and relentless effort had begun to show their results. Emily no longer looked like the fragile woman who had been wheeled into the rehabilitation center, broken in body and spirit. She was different now, stronger. Her face, once shadowed by grief, now carried determination. Her shoulders, once slumped with shame, stood straighter each day. It wasn't easy. Every morning began with exercises that tested her willpower. Her legs still ached, but the pain no longer defeated her. It fueled her. Each step she took was proof that Jason hadn't destroyed her. Each breath was a reminder that she had survived. Michael noticed the change too. He watched as Emily pushed herself harder, staying longer in therapy sessions, refusing to give up. Her resilience stirred something in him, a quiet admiration that grew deeper every day. She wasn't just healing, she was transforming. One afternoon, after months of therapy, Emily walked into the common room without her cane. The nurses clapped, and Michael stood frozen, his eyes wide with pride. Emily smiled faintly, her voice steady. "I told you I'd do it." Michael grinned. "You didn't just do it, you conquered it." But the transformation wasn't only physical. Emily began to rediscover parts of herself she thought were lost forever. She started journaling, writing down her fears, her hopes, her memories of her baby. She talked openly with a counselor about the trauma she had endured, something she once thought she'd never have the courage to do. Slowly, the darkness inside her made room for light. Her appearance changed too. With Michael's support, she replaced the old clothes that reminded her of her broken past. She chose colors that reflected strength: deep blues, soft whites, bold reds. She cut her hair shorter, a symbolic act of letting go of the woman she once was, the woman who had lived in Jason's shadow. The first time Emily saw her reflection in the mirror after her makeover, she hardly recognized herself. The pale, broken girl was gone. Staring back at her was a woman with fire in her eyes, a woman who had been through hell and refused to stay there. Michael, standing behind her, whispered, "That's the real you. That's the Emily I always knew was in there." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of sorrow, they were tears of triumph. "For so long I thought I was weak," she admitted, "but now I see I'm not." Her transformation became a turning point. Emily realized she no longer had to live in fear of Jason. She no longer had to carry the shame of what he had done to her. She was ready to reclaim her life, her dignity, and her future. But Emily's journey wasn't over yet, because while she was finding her strength, Jason was spiraling into darkness. And soon, their paths would collide again, in a way that would shock everyone. While Emily was rebuilding her life piece by piece, Jason Carter was tearing his own apart. On the surface, he still strutted around Dallas with the swagger of a man who thought he had everything under control. But beneath the bravado, cracks were spreading fast. Jason had thrown himself deeper into gambling, trying to chase the money he had already lost. Night after night, he sat in smoky backrooms, cards in his hands, whiskey at his side. The more he lost, the more reckless he became. His debts piled higher, and whispers of his failures followed him like a shadow. Vanessa, who once fed his ego, began to see the truth. Jason wasn't the strong, exciting man she thought she had. He was a liability. He begged for her money more often, making promises he never kept. The shine of their affair dulled quickly. One evening, Vanessa crossed her arms as Jason demanded more cash. "I can't keep bailing you out," she said coldly. "You're dragging me down." Jason's face twisted. "I thought you loved me." Vanessa laughed, cruel and sharp. "Love? Jason, I like the fun, but you're broke, you're sloppy, and you're nothing without me. I don't need a man like that." The words cut deeper than he cared to admit. For the first time, Jason saw Vanessa's smirk as the mirror of his own arrogance. He stormed out, slamming the door, but her words lingered. Back at home, the walls seemed to close in. The silence was deafening without Emily's presence. He noticed the empty chair where she used to sit, the quietness of a house once filled with her soft voice. But instead of regret, bitterness consumed him. Jason tried to find Emily once, showing up at the rehabilitation center unannounced. But Michael's security team stopped him at the door. "She doesn't want to see you," they said firmly. Jason shouted, cursed, tried to push his way through, but it was useless. The humiliation burned in his chest. He realized that not only had Emily escaped his control, she now had someone stronger standing by her side. As the days passed, Jason's world shrank. Friends distanced themselves. The gambling community whispered about his unpaid debts. Even the local loan sharks grew tired of his excuses. One night, a pair of men cornered him outside a bar, pressing him against the wall. "You've run out of time, Carter," one growled. "Pay up, or you'll regret it." Jason staggered home, shaken but too proud to admit fear. He poured himself another drink, muttering to himself that he still had control. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was losing everything. For the first time in his life, Jason felt powerless. Emily was no longer his to belittle. Vanessa had discarded him like trash, and the men he owed money to weren't going to wait forever. What Jason didn't realize was that his downfall had only just begun, and soon his own sins would catch up to him in ways he could never escape. The day finally came when Emily was ready to leave the rehabilitation center. Months of sweat, tears, and determination had transformed her into someone almost unrecognizable from the broken woman who had once been wheeled in. She could now walk with only a slight limp, her movements steady and strong. But more than her body, it was her spirit that had healed. Michael was waiting outside, leaning against his sleek black car. His face lit up when he saw her walk through the doors on her own. For a moment, he didn't see the bandages or the scars. He saw the courage in her steps. "You did it," he said proudly. Emily smiled faintly, her eyes shining with both pride and nerves. "I'm walking out of here. I didn't think this day would ever come." Michael opened the door for her. "This is just the beginning. You're not just leaving this place, you're leaving your old life behind." For weeks, Michael had been encouraging Emily to step back into the world, to reclaim the life Jason had stolen from her. At first, the idea terrified her. What if people whispered? What if they stared? What if they remembered her as the woman humiliated in the restaurant, the woman run over by her own husband? But now, standing tall, she realized she no longer cared. She wasn't the same Emily anymore. Her first real test came when Michael invited her to a charity event his company was sponsoring. The thought of walking into a crowded ballroom made her stomach twist, but Michael promised he would be by her side the entire time. "This isn't about them," he reminded her. "This is about you. Showing yourself you're not afraid anymore." That night, Emily stood before the mirror in a new dress Michael had gifted her, a soft silver gown that shimmered under the light. Her hair framed her face, her makeup subtle yet radiant. For the first time in years, she looked at her reflection and didn't see a victim. She saw a survivor. When they arrived at the gala, all eyes turned. Emily felt the weight of the stares, the whispers, the curiosity. Her heart pounded, but she took Michael's arm, lifted her chin, and stepped forward. Each step across the polished floor was a declaration. She was no longer the woman Jason had tried to destroy. The evening passed with cautious smiles and polite conversations. Some recognized her, murmuring about her story, but Michael silenced them with a glance. Emily found herself laughing softly at his jokes, sipping water while others toasted champagne, and realizing she belonged there just as much as anyone. By the end of the night, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in years: confidence. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't ashamed. She was visible, strong, and moving forward. But while Emily was stepping into the light, Jason was sinking deeper into the shadows, and soon their paths would collide in a public way that no one could have predicted. The charity gala had been going smoothly. Emily, radiant in her silver gown, had spent the evening mingling with Michael's colleagues, exchanging smiles and slowly realizing she belonged in this new world. For once, she wasn't defined by her scars. For once, she felt free. But freedom has a way of being tested. The sound of commotion rippled through the ballroom as the heavy doors swung open. Guests turned, their conversations dying mid-sentence. And there he was, Jason Carter. Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't seen him since the night at the hospital, the night he abandoned her. Now he stood at the entrance, unshaven, disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes wild. He looked like a man unraveling, yet his voice carried across the room with dangerous confidence. "Emily," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at her. "What are you doing here, with him?" The crowd gasped. Michael stepped forward instantly, placing himself between Jason and Emily. His calm yet firm voice cut through the tension. "You don't belong here, Jason. Leave." But Jason only laughed bitterly, his voice dripping with contempt. "Leave? This is my wife. She's mine. She doesn't belong with some rich fraud trying to play the hero." Emily's chest tightened. Dozens of eyes were fixed on her, waiting for her to respond. Fear clawed at her, memories of pain and humiliation rushing back. But then she felt Michael's reassuring presence beside her. His steady hand on her arm reminded her she wasn't alone anymore. Taking a shaky breath, Emily stepped forward. "I'm not your wife anymore, Jason. You made sure of that when you chose violence, when you left me bleeding in the street, when you signed away my hospital care." Whispers spread through the crowd. Guests exchanged shocked glances, murmuring about what they were hearing. Jason's face darkened. "Don't you dare embarrass me in front of these people." Emily's voice wavered, but she pushed forward, louder this time. "You already embarrassed yourself, Jason. You destroyed our marriage, you destroyed our child, and you will never have power over me again." The room fell silent. For the first time, Emily wasn't shrinking under Jason's anger. She was standing tall. Jason lunged forward, but Michael and 2 security guards blocked his path. The guards grabbed his arms, restraining him as he shouted profanities. "You'll regret this, Emily. You hear me? You'll regret this." The guests recoiled, their glamorous evenings shattered by the spectacle. Jason was dragged out, still kicking and screaming, his voice echoing down the hall until the doors slammed shut behind him. Emily stood trembling, her heart pounding. She expected shame, but instead she felt something new. Relief. She had faced Jason in front of everyone, and she hadn't broken. Michael turned to her, his eyes full of quiet pride. "You were incredible. You faced him. That took more strength than most people could ever find." Emily nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. But these were tears of release, not despair. What she didn't realize was that this public confrontation had set events into motion, and Jason's spiral into ruin was about to accelerate faster than ever before. Jason stumbled out of the gala that night, his pride shattered, his body still sore from being dragged away by security. The cold Dallas air bit into his skin, but it was nothing compared to the fire of humiliation burning inside him. He had been embarrassed in front of wealthy strangers, his ex-wife standing tall while he was reduced to a drunken outburst. He roamed the streets for hours, fueled by whiskey and rage. His phone buzzed with messages from loan sharks demanding payment. Vanessa's number, once a lifeline, was gone. She had blocked him weeks earlier. He had no one left to turn to, no money, and no power. By dawn, Jason found himself outside a dingy bar. He pushed through the doors, his clothes disheveled, his face pale and drawn. The bartender frowned but served him anyway, sliding a glass across the counter. Jason drank until his head spun, but the alcohol didn't wash away the memory of Emily's voice echoing through the ballroom. "You destroyed our child, and you will never have power over me again." The words haunted him. No matter how many times he slammed another drink, they stayed. Two men entered the bar, their eyes locking on Jason. He recognized them immediately. Debt collectors. They walked over slowly, like predators circling prey. "You've run out of time, Carter," one said, slamming a hand on the counter. "Pay up, or else." Jason tried to bluff, laughing bitterly. "I'll get the money. Just give me another week." But the men weren't laughing. One leaned close, his voice low and threatening. "You've had enough weeks. Next time we come looking for you, it won't be for a chat." They left him trembling at the bar, his tough act collapsing the moment the door closed. Jason's hands shook as he poured another drink. He was losing control, and deep down, he knew it. That night, he returned to his small rented house, the silence pressing down on him. The walls seemed to echo with Emily's absence, with the cries of the child they never had. He stared at old photos, Emily smiling before the pain, before the violence. He tore them to pieces, his rage spilling over. But when the anger subsided, all that remained was emptiness. He sank to the floor, clutching his head, whispering to himself, "She was supposed to stay, she was supposed to forgive me." But Emily hadn't stayed. She had chosen strength, and he was left with nothing. Days blurred into nights. Jason's jobs dried up. No one wanted to hire a man with a reputation for violence and debts. The phone calls grew more aggressive. His fridge emptied, his bills piled high. The man who once boasted about control now lived in chaos. Jason had finally reached rock bottom. But the cruelest part was yet to come, for soon the law would come knocking, and his past sins would drag him even lower. Jason woke to the sound of fists pounding against his front door. His head throbbed from another night of drinking, the empty bottles scattered across the floor like evidence of his downfall. He staggered to his feet, cursing under his breath, and yanked the door open. Two uniformed police officers stood on the porch. Behind them, a marked cruiser idled at the curb, its lights flashing silently. "Jason Carter?" one officer asked firmly. Jason squinted, trying to mask his unease. "Yeah, what's this about?" The officer's expression was cold. "You're under arrest for domestic assault, reckless endangerment, and attempted vehicular homicide." Jason's heart dropped. He tried to laugh it off. "This is a mistake. I didn't." But before he could finish, the officer spun him around and clamped the cold steel handcuffs onto his wrists. Jason struggled, his voice rising. "You can't do this. She's my wife. This is just a family matter." The officer's voice was sharp. "She's not your wife anymore, and this is no family matter. We have witness statements, medical reports, and your ex-wife's testimony. You're done, Carter." Neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains, whispering as Jason was dragged down the steps. He shouted at them, at the officers, at the world. "This isn't over. She set me up. She ruined me." His voice cracked, echoing into the empty morning air. At the station, reality hit harder. He sat in a cold cell, the stench of sweat and metal around him. A guard handed him the charges in black and white: assault, endangerment, attempted homicide. His hands shook as he read them. If convicted, he could spend years, maybe decades, behind bars. Jason tried to call Vanessa, but her number was still blocked. He tried calling old friends, but no one answered. He was alone, abandoned, just as he had abandoned Emily. Meanwhile, the news of his arrest spread quickly. Local papers picked up the story. Man arrested for running over pregnant wife. Social media erupted with outrage. Jason's name became synonymous with cruelty, his reputation shredded beyond repair. Employers cut ties. Even the gambling dens where he once wasted his nights turned him away. In court a week later, Jason shuffled in wearing an orange jumpsuit, shackles around his ankles. The room buzzed with reporters, their cameras flashing. And then he saw her, Emily, sitting in the front row beside Michael. She looked strong, composed, a far cry from the broken woman he had left bleeding on the pavement. Jason's stomach twisted. He wanted to shout at her to scare her back into silence, but the guard's grip on his arms reminded him of his place. He was no longer in control. The judge read the charges aloud, each word slamming against him like a hammer. The evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses had seen him behind the wheel. Doctors had testified to Emily's injuries. There was no escape. For the first time, Jason realized the truth. His downfall was no longer just personal. The law had caught up, and there was no way out. While Jason sat in his cold jail cell awaiting trial, Emily's life was moving in a new direction, one filled with light she never thought she would see again. The weeks after his arrest were difficult, but they were also the first time she felt truly free. For the first time in years, she could walk down the street without fear of his shadow behind her. Michael was always there. He drove her to every court hearing, sat beside her as she faced the man who had once tried to destroy her, and reminded her that she wasn't facing the storm alone anymore. His presence was steady, calm, like a rock in the middle of turbulent waves. One evening, after another exhausting day in court, Michael invited Emily to dinner at his home. His house was nothing like the small rented space she had shared with Jason. It was warm, welcoming, filled with soft lights and the faint smell of fresh flowers. For Emily, it felt like stepping into another world. One where kindness existed, one where safety was real. They sat across from each other at the dining table, a simple meal laid out between them. Michael raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said with a smile. Emily hesitated, then clinked her glass of water against his. "To new beginnings." Her voice was soft, but her heart carried the weight of the words. As the weeks turned into months, Emily noticed how naturally she began to rely on Michael. He never pushed, never demanded. Instead, he listened. He listened when she talked about her baby, when she cried about the nights she spent alone, when she doubted her own worth. He listened without judgment, offering only support and patience. One afternoon they walked through a park, the sun setting in hues of orange and pink. Emily, now walking with ease, paused to watch children playing on the swings. Her eyes misted, and Michael noticed. "You'll be a wonderful mother one day," he said gently. Emily turned to him, surprised. "Do you really think so? After everything, after losing?" Her voice cracked. Michael placed a hand over hers. "Yes, because you've already shown what love really is. You fought through pain most people could never survive. That's the kind of strength a child deserves in a mother." Emily's chest swelled with emotion. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not even Jason, not even her own family. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she could love again, live again, maybe even start a family again. As their bond deepened, whispers began among Michael's circle of friends and colleagues. People noticed the way he looked at Emily, the way she lit up when he was near. But Emily didn't care about gossip anymore. What mattered was the peace she felt by his side. What she didn't yet realize was that love was blooming quietly between them, and soon, Michael would show her just how serious he was about building a future together. The soft glow of evening filled Michael's living room, casting warm light across the hardwood floors. Emily sat curled up on the couch, sipping tea from a porcelain cup, her eyes thoughtful as she gazed out the large window. It had been another long day at court, another exhausting reminder of the pain Jason had caused. Yet here, in Michael's home, she finally felt calm. Michael entered the room, carrying a blanket. "You looked cold," he said softly, draping it over her shoulders. His kindness never failed to touch her, no matter how many times he showed it. "Thank you," Emily whispered, offering a faint smile. "You always think of the little things." Michael hesitated for a moment, his hands in his pockets, as if he were gathering courage. He had been patient for months, giving Emily the space she needed to heal. But now the feelings he had kept locked inside were growing too strong to contain. "Emily," he began slowly, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "There's something I need to tell you." She turned, her brows knitting slightly. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "From the moment I walked into that hospital room and saw you lying there, broken but still fighting, I knew something had changed inside me. I came to repay a kindness, but what I found was so much more. Emily, I love you." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Emily's heart skipped. For months she had leaned on Michael, trusted him, felt his unwavering support. But hearing those words aloud left her speechless. Her voice trembled. "Michael, you don't have to say that. You've already done so much for me. I don't want you to feel obligated." Michael stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "This isn't obligation. This isn't pity. I admire you, Emily. You've survived the worst kind of cruelty and still found the strength to rise. I don't just love what you've been through. I love who you are. You're the strongest woman I've ever known." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. "Michael, I don't know if I'm ready. I'm still healing. I'm still learning how to live without fear." He knelt in front of her, gently taking her hands. "Then let me walk beside you while you heal. Let me be part of that journey. I don't need you to be ready for everything. I just need you to know you're not alone." Her chest tightened, her breath shaky. For the first time since Jason had destroyed her world, she felt something stir inside her, a warmth that wasn't pain, but love. Emily whispered, almost afraid of the words, but unable to hold them back. "I think I might love you too." Michael's eyes lit with relief, his lips curving into the first genuine smile in weeks. He pulled her into an embrace, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Neither of them knew it yet, but this love would soon be tested in ways they never expected, especially as Jason's trial loomed closer, threatening to reopen every wound. The courthouse buzzed with tension on the first morning of Jason Carter's trial. Reporters crowded the steps, cameras flashing as spectators whispered about the case that had captured local headlines, a husband accused of running over his pregnant wife. Inside, the air was heavy with anticipation. Emily sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Michael sat beside her, his presence steady, his hand resting gently over hers. She could feel her heart pounding, every beat reminding her of the pain, the loss, and the long road that had led her here. The courtroom doors swung open, and Jason was led in by two guards. Dressed in an orange jumpsuit, shackles on his ankles, he looked nothing like the man who once carried himself with arrogance and swagger. His hair was unkempt, his face gaunt, his eyes bloodshot. Yet when his gaze landed on Emily, his lips twisted into a smirk, as if he still believed he had power over her. Emily sat taller, refusing to shrink under his stare. For the first time she felt stronger than him. "All rise," the bailiff announced as the judge entered. The room fell silent. The prosecution wasted no time. They painted Jason as a violent man with a history of gambling, drinking, and abuse. Witnesses were called to the stand, neighbors who had seen the truck, paramedics who described Emily's condition, doctors who explained the severity of her injuries. Each testimony cut deeper into Jason's defense. Emily's breath caught when the prosecutor displayed photos of her lying in the hospital bed, her leg in bandages, her body pale and bruised. The room gasped, the images shocking even those who already knew the story. When it was her turn to testify, Emily stood slowly, walking to the witness stand with quiet strength. She swore the oath and sat down, her eyes steady. The prosecutor asked gently, "Emily, can you tell the court what happened that night?" Her voice wavered at first, but she pressed forward. She described the argument, Jason's rage, the roar of the truck engine, the blinding headlights. She spoke of the pain, the blood, the moment she realized her baby was gone. Her words filled the courtroom, her truth undeniable. By the time she finished, tears streamed down more than one face in the gallery. Even the judge's expression softened. Jason's lawyer tried to twist her story, suggesting it was an accident, that Jason had simply lost control of the vehicle. But Emily's steady gaze silenced the room. "No," she said firmly. "He looked at me. He aimed the truck. He wanted to hurt me." Her words hung heavy in the air, impossible to dismiss. Jason's smirk faltered for the first time. He shifted uncomfortably, sweat beading on his forehead. The weight of evidence, the power of Emily's testimony, was breaking through his arrogance. But the trial was far from over, and as the days unfolded, shocking revelations would come to light, sealing Jason's fate once and for all. The trial stretched into its second week, and the courtroom was packed every day. The public couldn't get enough of the story: the abusive husband, the pregnant wife, the millionaire who stepped in to save her. But no one was prepared for the revelations that would surface next. On the fourth day, the prosecution called a surprise witness: Vanessa Moore. The name caused a ripple through the crowd. Emily's breath caught in her chest. Vanessa, the woman who had tormented her at the hospital, the woman who had stood by Jason's side. Why would she testify? When Vanessa walked into the courtroom, all eyes followed her. She looked different from the glamorous bar owner who once sneered at Emily. Her makeup was subdued, her dress conservative. For the first time, there was no arrogance in her stride, only unease. She took the stand, avoiding Jason's glare as she raised her right hand and swore the oath. The prosecutor approached. "Miss Moore, can you tell the court about your relationship with the defendant, Jason Carter?" Vanessa's voice was low but clear. "We were involved for over a year. I thought he loved me. But the truth is, Jason used me. He used my money to pay off gambling debts, and when I refused to give him more, he turned violent." The courtroom buzzed. Jason slammed his fists on the table. "She's lying!" he shouted, but the judge silenced him with a sharp warning. Vanessa continued, her hands trembling slightly. "The night he ran over Emily, he came to my bar after. He was drunk, angry, and bragging. He told me exactly what he had done. He said Emily was in his way, that she deserved it. He laughed about it." Gasps filled the room. Emily felt her heart twist as the memory of Vanessa mocking her replayed in her mind. But now, hearing this confession, she realized Vanessa too had been a pawn in Jason's cruelty. The prosecutor pressed further. "Why are you coming forward now?" Tears glistened in Vanessa's eyes. "Because I can't live with it anymore. I let him manipulate me. I hurt Emily when she was already broken, and I was wrong. But Jason is dangerous. If he gets out, he'll hurt more people. I have to tell the truth." Jason erupted again, shouting insults, calling Vanessa a liar, a traitor. Guards restrained him as the judge banged the gavel for order, but the damage was done. Jason's mask was crumbling. The prosecution then presented financial records proving Vanessa's claims. Large sums of money had flowed from her accounts to Jason's gambling debts. Witnesses from the bar testified, confirming that Jason had boasted about attacking Emily. Piece by piece, Jason's world unraveled in front of everyone. The smirk he once wore was gone, replaced by desperation. He tried to whisper to his lawyer, but the lawyer's face said it all. The case was lost. And, as the courtroom watched Jason unravel, it became clear. The truth was no longer hidden, and his fate was sealed tighter with every word spoken against him. The final day of Jason Carter's trial arrived, and the courthouse was buzzing with anticipation. Every seat in the courtroom was filled. Reporters lined the aisles, their cameras ready to capture the moment that would decide his fate. Emily sat in the front row, her heart racing. Michael's hand rested over hers, steadying her. She had relived the nightmare of Jason's abuse through every testimony, every piece of evidence, every cruel reminder of what she had endured. But today was different. Today, justice was about to speak. Jason shuffled into the courtroom in his orange jumpsuit, chains rattling around his wrists and ankles. He no longer carried the swagger he once flaunted. His eyes darted nervously, his face pale. For the first time he looked small, like a man stripped of power, waiting for the hammer to fall. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The judge entered, his expression grave as he settled into his seat. The room fell into silence. The jury filed in, each member solemn, their faces unreadable. Emily's stomach twisted as the foreman stood, holding the slip of paper that would change everything. In the case of the state versus Jason Carter, the foreman began, on the charge of domestic assault, we find the defendant guilty. Jason flinched, his fists tightening. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. On the charge of reckless endangerment, guilty. Emily's breath caught, her nails digging into her palms, and on the charge of attempted vehicular homicide, guilty. Gasps erupted in the courtroom. Emily's eyes filled with tears, her chest tightening as the weight of the words sank in. Guilty. Jason was guilty on all counts. The judge's voice echoed, steady and final. Jason Carter, for your crimes, this court sentences you to 25 years in state prison without the possibility of parole for the first 15 years. Jason exploded, shouting from his seat. This is rigged. She lied. They all lied. You can't do this to me. Guards rushed to restrain him, dragging him toward the exit as he kicked and screamed. But his voice no longer carried the same power. It was the desperate cry of a man who had finally lost everything. Emily covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face. This time they weren't tears of pain, they were tears of release. For years, Jason had controlled her life, broken her spirit, and nearly ended her. Now he was the one behind bars, and she was free. Michael leaned close, whispering gently, "It's over, Emily. He can't hurt you anymore." She nodded slowly, her shoulders trembling with relief. For the first time in so long, she felt safe. She felt like justice had finally listened. Like her suffering hadn't been in vain. As the crowd poured out of the courtroom, reporters shouted questions, but Emily ignored them. She didn't need the world's validation. She had her own justice, her own peace, and the strength to face the future. But Emily's story wasn't finished. Beyond the verdict lay a new chapter. One of love, healing, and a life she never thought she could have. The courthouse doors closed behind them, and for the first time in years, Emily felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off her shoulders. Jason was gone, locked away, powerless to hurt her again. The nightmare had finally ended. Michael guided her down the steps, shielding her from the flashing cameras and shouting reporters. "Ignore them," he whispered gently. "You don't owe anyone anything, not anymore." Emily nodded, her hand tightening around his. She didn't feel like the broken woman who once trembled under Jason's shadow. She felt free, and standing beside Michael, she realized she was ready for more than just survival. She was ready for life. Weeks later, Michael surprised her with a drive into the countryside. The city faded behind them, replaced by wide-open fields and the soft glow of the Texas sun. Emily leaned against the window, her curiosity piqued. "Where are we going?" "You'll see," Michael said with a smile. They pulled up to a beautiful ranch-style house, its white porch wrapping around like open arms. Emily's eyes widened. "Michael, what is this?" He stepped out of the car and opened her door, holding out his hand. "It's our new beginning. I bought this place for us, for you." Emily's heart raced. She followed him up the porch steps, her breath catching at the sight of the rolling fields stretching endlessly into the horizon. It was peaceful, safe, and full of promise, the opposite of the cage she had once lived in. Inside, the home was warm and inviting. The walls were painted soft tones, the rooms filled with light. In the living room, Michael pointed to a cozy corner by the fireplace. "I thought this could be your reading spot. You always said you loved books." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. "You did this? For me?" Michael took her hands, his gaze steady. "Emily, I don't just want to protect you. I want to build a life with you. A family, a future where you never doubt how loved you are." Her chest swelled with emotion. For so long she had only known pain, betrayal, and loss. And now, standing here, she saw a glimpse of everything she once thought impossible. Happiness, stability, love. They moved in together, and slowly, Emily began to rediscover joy. She planted flowers in the garden, cooked meals in the bright kitchen, and filled the house with laughter she never thought she would hear again. Her own. Michael kept his promise, standing by her through every step, reminding her that her scars didn't define her. Each day, Emily grew more certain. This was the life she was meant to have. One evening, as the sun set behind the fields, Emily stood on the porch, her hand resting on her stomach. A quiet smile spread across her face. She had news to share with Michael. News that would complete their journey. Emily was pregnant again, and this time, it was with a man who truly loved her. A new chapter was about to begin. 9 months passed quickly in the warmth of Emily and Michael's new home. Each day brought fresh hope, each night filled with whispered dreams about the family they were building together. For Emily, the pregnancy was more than a second chance at motherhood. It was proof that love could bloom after tragedy. Michael was endlessly attentive. He drove her to every doctor's appointment, held her hand during ultrasounds, and painted the nursery in soft shades of blue and cream. "This baby," he would say with a smile, "is going to know nothing but love." Emily often paused in the nursery, her hands resting on her round belly, whispering to the little life inside her, "You're safe now. Mommy and Daddy are waiting for you." Each kick filled her with joy, though sometimes her heart ached with the memory of the child she had lost. But Michael was always there, reminding her gently, "This baby is a blessing. He's our future." When the day finally came, Emily woke before dawn with sharp pains. Panic surged, but Michael was already at her side. "It's time," he said calmly, grabbing the hospital bag and rushing her to the car. His steady presence calmed her trembling hands. Hours later, in a bright delivery room filled with the beeping of monitors and the quiet encouragement of nurses, Emily clutched Michael's hand as tears streamed down her face. The pain was overwhelming, but she held on, her eyes locked on his. "You're almost there," Michael whispered, brushing her damp hair back. "You can do this." With one final push, the room filled with the cry of new life. Emily gasped as the nurse placed a tiny, squirming baby boy on her chest. His skin was warm, his cry fierce, his little fingers curling around hers. Emily sobbed, holding him close. "My baby, my miracle." Michael leaned over, his own eyes wet, kissing her forehead before gazing down at the child. "He's perfect, Emily. Absolutely perfect." The nurse smiled. "Congratulations. You have a healthy baby boy." Emily and Michael exchanged a look of pure joy, a silent promise that this child would never know the pain of the past, only the love they carried forward. Days later, back at their ranch home, the house felt transformed. The baby's soft cries echoed through the rooms, filling the once empty space with life. Emily sat in the rocking chair in the nursery, cradling her son as Michael watched from the doorway, his heart full. "What should we name him?" Michael asked softly. Emily smiled down at the baby's peaceful face. "Daniel. Daniel Reynolds. Strong and pure." Michael nodded, his chest swelling with pride. "Daniel it is." As Emily rocked her son, she felt the final pieces of her broken heart mend. She had endured pain beyond measure, but now, with Daniel in her arms and Michael by her side, she finally understood. She was living the life she was always meant to have. But while Emily embraced her new family, Jason sat behind prison walls, his world crumbling, his loneliness deepening, a stark reminder of the justice that had brought her here. Inside the gray walls of the state prison, Jason Carter's world had shrunk to a cold cell no larger than a bathroom. The man who once roared with arrogance, who believed he controlled everyone around him, was now reduced to a number on an inmate roster. The clang of bars was his alarm clock, the shouts of other prisoners his nightly lullaby. The days blurred together, mornings of tasteless food, afternoons of forced labor, nights staring at the ceiling with nothing but regret. At first, Jason tried to maintain the swagger, pretending he was still the tough guy he once bragged to be. But prison has a way of stripping men down. Here, no one cared about his excuses, no one respected his temper. He was just another criminal among many, and weaker than most. Loneliness settled over him like a heavy blanket. Vanessa was gone. She never wrote, never visited. His so-called friends from the gambling dens vanished the moment his money dried up. Even his family refused his calls. Jason had destroyed every connection he ever had. Meanwhile, news of Emily's new life trickled in. He heard whispers from guards who followed the story in the papers. Emily walking again, Emily standing strong in court, Emily finding love with a millionaire and welcoming a child. Each headline was like a dagger. She was thriving while he was rotting. The more Jason thought about it, the more bitterness consumed him. Yet beneath the anger was something worse. Regret he could never undo. One evening, sitting alone in the prison yard, Jason stared at the sky through the chain-link fence. For the first time, he admitted the truth to himself. He had destroyed everything. His cruelty had cost him his wife, his child, his freedom, and his future. There was no going back. His fate was sealed. While Jason withered in prison, Emily was flourishing. At their ranch home, she held baby Daniel in her arms, rocking him gently as Michael wrapped an arm around her shoulders. The contrast could not have been sharper. One life trapped in despair, the other blooming in love. One day, Emily spoke at a local women's shelter, her story now an inspiration for others. Standing tall, her voice steady, she told them, "I was broken once. I believed I had no worth, no power, no way out. But I learned that strength doesn't come from never falling. It comes from rising after the fall. To every woman here, you are stronger than you think, and you deserve a life free from fear." The room erupted in applause, many wiping away tears. Emily's scars had become her message, her pain transformed into purpose. Jason's name faded into silence, remembered only as a cautionary tale of a man destroyed by his own cruelty. But Emily's name lived on as a symbol of resilience and hope. In the end, justice was served. Jason lived in the shadow of his sins, while Emily stood in the light of love, proving that no darkness can extinguish a woman's strength. So, my friend, here we are at the end of Emily's journey. If you're still here with me right now, that means something in her story touched your heart in a way words can't fully explain. And maybe that's the point, because stories like this aren't just entertainment, they're mirrors. They remind us of the strength hidden inside pain, the beauty that can grow from brokenness. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Emily's suffering was unbearable, yet through it she found a new life, a deeper resilience, and love that healed her scars. That lesson is for all of us. Whatever we face, no matter how impossible it seems, it can shape us into someone stronger, someone unshakable. So as this story closes, I want you to carry that truth with you. And if it stirred something in your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, like it, and join us by subscribing. Because together, we can keep telling stories that remind us what healing, hope, and real strength truly look like. The night was supposed to be quiet in the small Texas neighborhood, but instead, it turned into a nightmare that no one would ever forget. Emily Carter, 6 months pregnant, stood outside her small rented house, trembling in the cold evening air. She clutched her belly as if holding on to the only thing that still gave her life meaning, her unborn child. Inside the house, Jason, her husband, was shouting, his voice slurred with alcohol. The neighbors had grown used to the fights, but tonight it was different. Tonight, the rage in Jason's voice carried something darker, something dangerous. Emily's hands shook as she stepped outside, hoping to get some air and calm herself before he came out after her. But Jason wasn't calming down. He stormed out, his face red, his eyes blazing. In his drunken anger, he spat venomous words at Emily, calling her useless, blaming her for his failures, and accusing her of being the reason his life had fallen apart. Emily said nothing. She just stood there, frozen, the tears silently rolling down her cheeks. Then, in one horrifying moment, Jason's anger crossed a line that could never be taken back. He climbed into his truck, the old rusty pickup he always bragged about. The engine roared to life, echoing through the street. Emily's eyes widened in terror as she realized what he was about to. "Jason, stop!" she screamed, stepping backward, clutching her stomach. But Jason didn't stop. He pressed the accelerator, and the truck lurched forward. The headlights blazed directly at Emily. Her scream pierced the night as the vehicle charged toward her. The sound of impact silenced everything. Emily's body hit the ground with a sickening thud. Her screams were cut short as pain ripped through her entire body. Blood spread across the pavement beneath her, staining the night with horror. Neighbors ran outside, shouting, calling 911, but it all felt too late. Emily lay there, barely conscious, her vision fading. She whispered weakly, "My baby," before her voice was swallowed by the darkness. Jason stepped out of the truck, his face twisted with something between anger and fear. But instead of rushing to help, instead of kneeling beside the woman carrying his child, he sneered. He looked around at the shocked neighbors and muttered, "She deserved it," before turning his back and walking inside. The street was filled with cries and chaos. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, racing toward the bloody scene. Emily's life was slipping away second by second, and the unborn child she had dreamed of holding was hanging by a thread. The neighbors gathered, some crying, some yelling at Jason, who coldly shut the door behind him. The world was spinning for Emily as her vision turned black. For a moment, it seemed like this was the end, like there was no hope left. But no one knew that this night, this act of brutality, would be the very beginning of a story that would shake the lives of everyone involved and change Emily's fate forever. Long before the blood on the street, before the flashing red lights of the ambulance, Emily Carter's life was already a quiet tragedy. To the outside world, she looked like any young woman in her late 20s, pretty, kind, and soft-spoken. She worked at a small coffee shop on the edge of Dallas, smiling at strangers and serving them lattes as if she had no worries in the world. But behind that smile, Emily carried a weight few could imagine. She had grown up in a modest family in Oklahoma. Her parents passed away when she was still in her teens, leaving her with no one but herself to rely on. By 20, she moved to Texas, chasing the hope of building a simple, honest life. That was where she met Jason Carter. At first, Jason seemed charming, funny, confident, and full of promises. He told Emily he would take care of her, that he would build a future for them both. For a girl longing for stability, Jason felt like a safe harbor. But a harbor can turn into a storm. Not long after they married, Jason's true colors began to show. The man who once promised love now raised his voice in anger. The man who swore he'd protect her now slammed doors, cursed her name, and left her crying alone. When Emily found out she was pregnant, her heart filled with hope again. She thought maybe a baby would change everything. Maybe Jason would finally settle down, stop gambling, stop drinking, and realize the gift they were given. She pictured Jason holding their baby in his arms, smiling the way he used to in the early days. That hope kept her going. But instead of joy, Jason greeted the news with resentment. He didn't want the responsibility. He accused Emily of trapping him, of ruining his life. The more her belly grew, the colder Jason became. Nights stretched long, with Emily sitting on the couch alone, rubbing her stomach, whispering to her unborn child that everything would be okay, even when she didn't believe it herself. At the coffee shop, her coworkers noticed the bruises sometimes hidden under her sleeves. They asked, "Are you okay, Emily?" She always smiled faintly and said, "I'm fine, just clumsy." No one knew the truth. Emily had learned to carry her pain in silence because she believed no one would save her. Yet deep down, Emily still loved. She loved fiercely, not just her unborn baby, but even the man who was destroying her spirit. That love kept her from walking away. That love tied her to Jason, even as he betrayed her with late-night disappearances and whispers of another woman. Emily's only refuge was her unborn child. Every kick she felt inside her reminded her to hold on just a little longer. She believed that one day she would look into her baby's eyes and know that all the suffering was worth it. But little did Emily know, the storm brewing in Jason's heart was about to destroy everything she had clung to, and the baby she prayed for would be caught in the middle of his rage. To everyone else, Jason Carter looked like an ordinary man. He worked odd jobs in construction, drove an old pickup truck, and carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed he was tougher than the world. To strangers, he could flash a smile and charm his way through small talk. But behind closed doors, when the neighbors couldn't see and the house grew silent, Jason's true nature came out like a shadow swallowing the light. Jason had always been a man of dangerous habits. Even before he married Emily, he was addicted to gambling. It started with poker nights, then slot machines, and soon it escalated into secret trips to underground casinos outside Dallas. Every time he lost, which was often, he came home angrier, more bitter, and more dangerous. His voice would rise. His hands would slam against the table. Emily would shrink into silence, trying not to provoke him further. The drinking came next. Bottles piled up in the trash. Whiskey on his breath became his constant perfume. The Jason who once made promises about a future now stumbled into the house at 2 a.m, shouting, cursing, blaming Emily for everything wrong in his life. And when words weren't enough, his fists sometimes followed. But perhaps the darkest betrayal wasn't the bruises or the fear, it was the other woman. Her name was Vanessa Moore, a wealthy bar owner with money to burn and a taste for reckless men. Jason saw in her what he couldn't have with Emily: power, luxury, and escape. With Vanessa, he didn't have to face responsibility. With Vanessa, he could pretend he was the man he always wanted to be, instead of the failure he felt inside. Vanessa encouraged his recklessness. She fed his ego, slipped him cash when his gambling debts piled too high, and laughed at his crude jokes. But most of all, she pushed him further away from Emily. "Why stay with her?" Vanessa would sneer. "She's weak. She's dragging you down. She's nothing compared to what you could have." Jason believed her words. He let them poison his heart until he saw Emily not as his wife, not as the mother of his child, but as the obstacle keeping him from the life he thought he deserved. At home, Emily could sense the distance growing. Jason's late nights, his phone calls in hushed tones, the smell of perfume on his shirts. She tried to confront him once, quietly asking, "Jason, is there someone else?" His response was a shove against the wall and a growled warning, "Don't ever question me again." From that moment, Emily knew she was living with a stranger. The man she had loved was gone. In his place was someone cruel, unpredictable, and dangerous. And yet, because of the baby, she stayed. Because of hope, she endured. But the more Jason sank into Vanessa's arms and the darker his addictions grew, the closer Emily came to a tragedy she could never have imagined. And the night the truck roared to life was already on the horizon. It was a Friday night when Emily's world cracked open for everyone to see. She had spent the day at the coffee shop, her swollen feet aching from standing too long. 6 months pregnant, she moved slower than before, but she still forced a smile for every customer. Her coworkers wished her well as she left early to meet Jason. He had promised to take her out for dinner, a rare gesture she hadn't seen from him in months. Emily dressed carefully, choosing a simple blue dress that still fit her growing belly. She brushed her hair and added a touch of lipstick, hoping maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. Maybe Jason was finally trying. Maybe he remembered that she was his wife, not his burden. When she arrived at the downtown restaurant Jason had chosen, her heart lifted for a moment. The place was crowded, the lights dim, the air filled with laughter and clinking glasses. Emily spotted Jason's truck parked outside, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of excitement. But that flicker died the moment she stepped inside. At the center of the room, Jason sat at a table with Vanessa Moore. Vanessa's red dress clung to her figure, her laughter loud and careless as she leaned into Jason's shoulder. His hand rested on hers, and their faces were so close they might as well have been kissing. Emily froze in the doorway. For a second, the world stopped spinning. Her stomach twisted, her chest tightened, and her legs trembled under the weight of betrayal. She thought she must be dreaming, that her mind was playing tricks on her. But then Vanessa's eyes met hers. Vanessa smirked. That cruel, triumphant smirk told Emily everything. This wasn't an accident. This was intentional. Jason finally noticed Emily standing there. Instead of guilt, instead of shame, his face twisted with annoyance. "What are you doing here?" he barked, loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. The room fell silent. Strangers stared, whispering. Emily's cheeks burned as tears welled in her eyes. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. Vanessa leaned closer to Jason and said loudly, "Oh, don't be so harsh, Jason. She looks like she's just lost." Her laughter rang out, sharp and cruel, cutting into Emily's heart. Jason pushed back his chair, stood up, and without hesitation placed his arm around Vanessa's waist. "Go home, Emily," he said coldly. "You don't belong here." The restaurant gasped. Emily's tears spilled over, her hands instinctively wrapping around her stomach as if shielding her unborn child from the humiliation. She turned and stumbled out, the sound of Vanessa's mocking laugh echoing in her ears. On the sidewalk, Emily collapsed onto a bench, sobbing uncontrollably. The night air was cold, but not colder than the emptiness inside her. She wanted to scream, but her voice was gone. She wanted to hate Jason, but her heart still clung to the hope that somewhere inside him was the man she once loved. What Emily didn't know was that this very public humiliation was only the beginning, and the storm of violence Jason was about to unleash would be far worse than the shame of that night. Emily sat in the passenger seat of Jason's truck, her hands trembling as she held her swollen belly. The ride home from the restaurant was silent, but the silence was worse than shouting. Jason's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like his teeth might break. Emily stared out the window, tears streaking down her face, replaying the scene of Vanessa's smirk and Jason's cruel words. When they pulled into the driveway of their small rented house, Jason slammed the truck door so hard it rattled. Emily climbed out slowly, her body aching, her heart heavier than ever. She hoped, just for a moment, that maybe he would walk inside, go to bed, and leave her alone. But Jason wasn't finished. The door slammed again behind him as he shouted, "You embarrassed me tonight, Emily? Do you have any idea how pathetic you looked? Standing there, crying like some weak little girl." Emily's voice cracked as she tried to speak. "Jason, I didn't embarrass you. You embarrassed me. You brought her there. You—" "Shut up," Jason roared, slamming his fist onto the kitchen table. The sound echoed through the tiny house. Emily flinched, wrapping her arms protectively around her stomach. Her baby, her only reason for enduring this nightmare. "I've had enough of your whining," Jason continued, pacing back and forth like a predator. "You don't do anything for me. You just sit there, draining me, weighing me down. Do you even know how much I've sacrificed?" Emily's tears blurred her vision. Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out. "I've given you everything, Jason. I've stood by you, even when you hurt me, even when you gamble away our money, even when you—" Her voice broke. "Even when you cheat on me." Jason froze, his eyes narrowing into slits. "Watch your mouth." For the first time, Emily didn't back down. "I know about Vanessa. Everyone knows. You don't even try to hide it anymore. Do you have any idea what that does to me? To our child?" Jason's face twisted with fury. In one violent motion, he grabbed a glass from the counter and hurled it against the wall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, scattering across the floor like shards of their broken marriage. Emily screamed, clutching her stomach as she stumbled back. Jason advanced, his voice a growl. "Don't you dare talk to me about that baby. That baby ruined everything. You ruined everything." Emily gasped, her heart breaking. "How can you say that? This is your child, too." But Jason wasn't listening. He was consumed by rage, by the poison Vanessa had fed him, by the bitterness of his own failures. He shoved a chair aside, the wood scraping against the floor, his every movement sending terror down Emily's spine. For the first time, Emily felt something shift inside her. Not just fear, but the realization that she and her baby were not safe with this man. What Emily didn't know was that this explosive fight was only the spark, and the fire that followed would nearly take her life.
Do you want to witness one of the most explosive showdowns ever? Picture Talia Moore, a near-mythical Delta Force operative, locked in a life-or-death struggle against Beck Montoya amid blazing flames and collapsing steel beams. Their final clash sends shockwaves through the entire criminal underworld, and that's just a glimpse of the heart-stopping action. In this extended story, you'll uncover the secrets behind Talia's lethal skills, the harrowing fate of innocent captives, and the true reach of a sinister syndicate lurking in the shadows. Ready to plunge into the twists and turns of this epic tale? Make sure to listen through to the very end. You don't want to miss how it all concludes. And if you enjoy gripping stories packed with danger and heroism, remember to subscribe to our channel for more pulse-pounding adventures. Your support fuels our passion for storytelling and helps us bring you even more incredible sagas. Talia Moore sat on the curb in the grimy heart of Eastfall, a sprawling city known for its ceaseless rains and the cold indifference of its inhabitants. In the half-light of a flickering street lamp, she looked like just another drifter on the streets, shoulders slumped, clothing worn to threads, and eyes obscured by the tangle of her hood. Passers-by glanced at her, then turned away with the same hurried apathy they showed to anyone else forced to sleep in doorways. The city streets were slick from a recent downpour, reflecting the neon signs of a late-night diner across the road, its bright pink and green lettering flickering ominously in the puddles. Cars hissed by, kicking up sprays of water and trash, but Talia barely moved when stray droplets soaked her ragged coat. She didn't care about the stench of stale rain or the worn soles of her battered boots. The city's disregard for people like her made it the perfect hiding place, a cloak that let her move unseen in the urban sprawl. Yet underneath that battered exterior lay something no stranger would guess. Talia Moore had once been the most lethal operative in an elite Delta Force unit. Her posture, though seemingly weary, revealed a coiled tension if one knew what to look for. She positioned herself at the perfect vantage to observe everything within a block's radius, adjusting only slightly to keep an eye on pedestrians and vehicles. Each subtle movement was deliberate, honed through years of training in environments far more treacherous than any back alley in Eastfall. Once upon a time, Talia had worn a uniform with pride, leading covert missions in hostile territories. Records of her deeds had, however, been erased in a series of clandestine cover-ups so thorough that even her name appeared on no official rosters. She was a phantom the government no longer acknowledged, a ghost who wandered the back alleys of an uncaring metropolis. That night, the damp cold seeped into her bones, aggravating old injuries that never fully healed. She could recall a painful mission in the jungles of an unnamed country, the humidity there so thick it felt like drowning with each breath. Memories of dusty roads in war-torn regions flickered through her mind, desert heat scorching her face as she navigated landmines and ambushes. Hardly anyone suspected that a woman dozing by a diner in a tattered coat had once outsmarted, outrun, and outgunned entire squads of insurgents. She had left behind that life, or perhaps that life had left her behind. Either way, she was consigned to the shadows because her continued survival depended on secrecy. Tonight, she was not simply loafing around in the drizzle. A faint tremor in her jaw and the sharp vigilance behind her half-closed lids suggested she was waiting for something, or perhaps for someone. It wasn't random that she chose this particular corner, near a rundown diner that stayed open all night. Under the soft buzz of neon signage, drug dealers occasionally approached unwary patrons. Lone officers sometimes harassed the homeless, and desperate souls sought quick respite in a cup of stale coffee. Talia liked vantage points where the flow of human traffic was predictable, yet overlooked by the city's indifferent throng. The perfect camouflage, but not everyone would walk by without noticing her. Sooner or later, someone was bound to disrupt this fragile peace. Perhaps an overzealous patrol or a curious local hoping to rid the neighborhood of what they saw as street trash. Talia had been stalked by minor threats before, petty thieves, small-time criminals convinced she was an easy target. She usually let them walk away with a warning or a quick lesson in humility. However, on this particular night, things would unfold in a way even she couldn't fully anticipate. Eastfall's gloom would soon transform into the spark of a far-reaching chain of events. Events that would bring Talia's formidable skills out of the darkness in which she had concealed them for so long. The night deepened, and the rain turned into a steady drizzle that gleamed under the neon lights. Water pooled in potholes, rippling with each passing car. Talia kept her hood pulled low, tapping her fingers lightly against the curb in a rhythm that mirrored her heartbeat. She heard distant sirens, a normal sound in this part of the city, yet something in the cadence tonight felt off. It was as though the city itself was giving her a warning she couldn't fully decipher. She sat motionless, scanning the reflective surfaces of storefronts across the street and the black window of a vacant laundromat. In those glimmers, she caught sight of a police cruiser rolling down the road with deliberate slowness. A moment later, the vehicle pulled to a stop not far from the diner, and 4 uniformed figures emerged. She recognized their body language instantly. They weren't responding to a call with urgency or dealing with an immediate threat. Instead, there was an air of casual superiority about them, underpinned by the sort of reckless confidence that certain officers wore like a second skin. The leader of the group was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a rigid stance and a perpetual scowl. Sergeant Stephen Ards. His name was emblazoned on his badge and also etched into Talia's memory. Rumor around the streets labeled him as someone who enjoyed throwing his weight around when the cameras were off. Talia had seen the type many times. The overbearing posture, the restless grip on his baton. He was practically screaming for a confrontation. His 3 subordinates fanned out behind him. One was wiry and fidgety, perhaps new on the force but too eager to prove himself. Another, a woman with her hair tightly pulled back, maintained a closed-off expression that gave little away. The last was a stocky man whose eyes flickered with a sort of cruel humor, like he secretly relished the idea of scaring vulnerable people. They congregated in front of Talia, forming a loose semicircle. "Well, look here," Sergeant Ards announced, voice raised to be heard over the rain. "Another lost cause on our sidewalks. Shouldn't you be in a shelter somewhere? His words dripped contempt, but Talia caught the slight grin tugging at the corner of his lips. A grin that told her this was not genuine concern, but a prelude to humiliation. Talia said nothing, watching him with an impassive gaze. She sized him up, police belt weighed down by a service pistol, baton, flashlight, and cuffs. She imagined how swiftly she could strip him of those tools if push came to shove. Her Delta Force instincts told her it would take less than 5 seconds to incapacitate him. Yet she remained perfectly still, hoping to avoid the trouble that Ards was so clearly inviting. One of his subordinates, the wiry officer, snickered. "Hey, Sarge, notice her jacket? It's got a patch that looks military." He leaned closer, squinting at the worn fabric. "Think she's legit or one of those fakes who scrounge for sympathy bucks?" Ards took a step nearer, hooking his thumbs into his belt loops. "Yeah, you got dog tags, soldier." His tone dripped with condescension. He expected Talia to either cower or lash out. Sometimes brutes like Ards needed only the slightest provocation to pounce. Talia remained silent, her pulse steady. She recognized that any sudden movement might escalate the situation. She also knew that while she could defend herself handily, the resulting chaos would draw too much attention. Her anonymity was her shield, and she had no wish to blow it for a petty showdown with a few small-time bullies. Still, the tension in her muscles coiled. She would respond if forced. Ards noticed her calm indifference and seemed insulted by it. He sneered, tapping his baton against his palm. Perhaps in his mind, he was dealing with another helpless vagrant who could be shoved around for entertainment. When she remained unresponsive, Ards' frustration grew. "Let's see some ID," he barked, stepping close enough for Talia to smell stale coffee on his breath. "Or are you one of those lying panhandlers?" She met his gaze, her own eyes revealing a flicker of something unreadable. Something that should have warned him off. But Ards was too caught up in his own bravado. As the drizzle intensified and pooled around their feet, Talia braced herself for the oncoming storm, not of weather, but of conflict. She'd been around bullies like him before, and they always mistook silence for weakness. Tonight, that miscalculation would spin the night into directions none of them could guess. Lightning flickered in the distance, and thunder rolled faintly across the sky, underscoring the rising tension. Talia tried a final measure of restraint. She opened her mouth, hoping a few well-chosen words might diffuse the situation. "I don't carry ID," she said evenly, choosing each syllable with deliberate calm. "I'm no threat to you." Her voice only seemed to spur Ards on. "No ID, huh? Vagrancy is a chargeable offense around here. Looks like we got ourselves a real heroine, guys." His baton tapped rhythmically against his palm, a silent threat. The wiry officer, taking his cue from Ards, snickered again and circled behind Talia, as if they intended to box her in. An uneasy shuffle ran through the female officer's stance. Talia noted it in her peripheral vision. Perhaps not all of them relished this. Sometimes group psychology took over, and a single dissenting voice was drowned out by the others. But no one spoke up to de-escalate. The group smelled blood, or at least the opportunity to make their night more entertaining at Talia's expense. Ard stepped closer, waving his baton near her face. "Get up. Now, put your hands where I can see them. Let's see just how tough you are when you're standing, and we're all looking you in the eye." Talia slowly rose, not wanting to appear confrontational, but also unwilling to let herself be cornered. She was dwarfed by Ards's bulky figure, yet there was a fluid assurance in her stance. A lesser observer might think she was nervous or shaky, but in reality she was centering her balance, adjusting her posture for optimal defense. Her breathing slowed, her gaze flicked to each officer in turn, tracking their positions. "I don't want trouble," she said, voice low and steady. But Ards was already reaching for her, determined to enforce his will. He grabbed the sleeve of her coat with a meaty hand, yanking her forward. The moment he did, Talia's survival reflexes kicked in. The next few seconds happened so quickly, the other officers barely registered the movement. Talia twisted her arm free in a practiced maneuver, pivoting on the ball of her foot to clamp her hand around Ards's wrist. Leveraging momentum, she torqued his arm behind his back, forcing him to drop to one knee with a startled yelp. The baton clattered onto the wet asphalt. Ards grimaced, a flicker of shock replacing his arrogant smirk. The other 3 officers jolted into motion. The wiry man scrambled for his sidearm, The stocky one yelled an expletive, and the female officer took a step back, her eyes wide. For an instant, Talia had Ards under control, her grip precise enough that a single additional movement could break his elbow. But she released him almost as quickly as she had subdued him. Her intention was not to maim, it was to signal that she was no easy victim. She stepped back to create distance. Rain dripped from her hood, trailing down the sharp angles of her jaw. The stocky officer fumbled with his holster, and the wiry one finally freed his weapon, pointing it with unsteady hands. Thunder rolled again, louder this time. The atmosphere was electric. Ards got up slowly, massaging his wrenched arm with visible anger. His eyes blazed with humiliation. A mere second or two had upended the entire power dynamic, and he couldn't let it stand. "You're gonna regret that," he snarled, retrieving his baton from the ground. Before Talia could brace herself, he lashed out, adrenaline fueling his swing. The baton slammed into the side of her head, stunning her and sending flashes of white pain across her vision. She fell hard, knees hitting the drenched pavement. Blood pounded in her ears and a sickening dizziness took hold. Dimly, she heard shouts from the other officers, but their words blurred into white noise as darkness crept into her peripheral vision. When Talia came to, the hum of fluorescent lights replaced the roar of rain. She was seated in a dim interrogation room that reeked of stale coffee and the faint odor of sweat. Her wrists were encased in heavy metal handcuffs, tethered to a loop on the metal table. Across from her sat Sergeant Ards, sporting a bruise on his cheek from where she had twisted him to the ground. He stared at her with a combination of anger and something else. Uncertainty, perhaps. He didn't understand how a scrawny, seemingly homeless woman had managed to outmaneuver him in front of his team. For a bully like Ards, that was personal humiliation. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, slapping a folder onto the table with theatrical force. Talia glanced at the folder, which looked mostly empty, a few sheets of paper inside. Likely they had tried to run her fingerprints, only to come up blank. She said nothing, content to let silence be her shield. Ards's jaw tightened. He had expected fear, groveling, or at least defiance. Instead, he was confronted by Talia's unsettling calm. With a low growl, he threw open the folder. "Your prints don't match anything in our system. No ID, no record with any shelter in town. You're a ghost. That means you must be lying about whatever your background is. We're prepared to charge you with assault on an officer. That's serious time, lady." Talia's head still throbbed from the blow, and she could feel dried blood matted in her hair near the temple, poorly cleaned by whoever had given her a cursory bandage. Yet she kept her expression impassive, forcing her senses to remain alert. She had lived through far worse interrogations. A small-town precinct was child's play compared to black site facility debriefings or field arrests in hostile countries. "You're making a mistake," she said at last, her voice hoarse. She wasn't sure if she meant it as a warning to him or a statement of fact. Ard's eyes narrowed. Before he could reply, a soft knock interrupted them. Another officer, a young man with sweaty palms and a nervous twitch, stuck his head in. "Sarge, phone for you. Some official from the Department of Defense is on the line. They're insistent." Confusion flickered across Ard's face, quickly turning to anger. "Department of Defense? That's not possible. You sure it's not a prank?" The young officer just shrugged helplessly, adding that the voice on the phone sounded extremely authoritative. With a menacing grunt, Ard stomped out of the room, leaving Talia alone with her thoughts. Minutes later, she heard shouting in the hallway. Ard's voice escalated, responding to a calmer but firmer tone from whoever was on the phone. Though she couldn't make out every word, phrases like, "She can't just walk," and "Who does she work for?" cut through the muffled barrier. After a few more heated exchanges, Ard stormed back into the room, face flushed. His pride was clearly wounded even more deeply now. "Release her," he barked to the officer standing guard. "No charges, no record of this. Nothing. That's an order." A hush fell over the room as the officer hastily unlocked Talia's cuffs, letting them drop onto the table. Ards leaned in close, his voice low with venom. "Your friends in high places might have saved you tonight, but I'll find out who you really are. Next time you won't get off so easy." Talia didn't bother responding. She simply rose from the chair, rubbing at the red marks on her wrists. Without a backward glance, she walked out of the interrogation room, leaving Ard simmering behind her. Outside, the drizzle had lightened to a mist. She stepped onto the wet pavement, her head still throbbing. The city lights felt harsher, and the swirl of residual adrenaline made her shaky. Normally, Talia would have vanished into the night like a wraith, seeking a new hiding spot. But the moment she stepped off the station's threshold, she sensed someone watching her from the edge of the lampost's glow. A tall figure in a dark, tailored suit emerged from the shadow cast by the flickering streetlight. He raised his hands in a gesture of non-aggression, revealing a neatly pressed shirt cuff peeking out from under his jacket. Talia froze, tension gripping her anew. She was in no mood for yet another confrontation, especially with someone who might be more than just a nosy passerby. "Miss Moore," he said calmly, voice subdued yet carrying a certain confidence. "My name is Ethan Caldwell. I'm with the FBI." He moved slowly, pulling a leather badge holder from his inner pocket so she could see the glint of the federal seal under the street lamp. "I was inside the precinct on an unrelated matter. Heard a commotion about an unidentified woman with unusual combat skills. I had a hunch it might be someone special." Talia regarded him through narrowed eyes. She had no reason to trust any law enforcement figure, let alone a federal agent. Her experiences taught her that power structures often turned a blind eye to corruption. For all she knew, Caldwell might be just another cog in a broken system. "You have the wrong person," she muttered, turning to walk away. She had no interest in revealing anything more than she already had. He didn't try to grab her, which was a point in his favor. "I know about Lionel Greer," Caldwell said, his voice carrying enough volume to catch her attention. Talia stopped in her tracks, shoulders stiffening. Lionel Greer was a name that circulated in the underworld, a rumored arms dealer and trafficker whose reach extended well beyond Eastfall. She'd heard the rumor that he sold weapons to rogue paramilitary groups and was also knee-deep in human trafficking. Once upon a time, Talia had caught wind of him through her old channels. That Caldwell even knew Greer's name suggested he might have real intel. She turned slightly, half-facing him, ready to slip into the shadows if needed. "What do you want from me?" she asked tersely. Caldwell stepped a little closer, keeping his posture unthreatening. "I'm building a case against Greer. We believe he's not just trading arms, but also overseeing a vast human trafficking operation along the harbor. Each time we try to pin him down, he disappears behind layers of shell companies and corrupt officials. We need someone who can operate outside the usual channels, a specialist who can move in the shadows." His eyes flicked to the bandage on Talia's head. "From the looks of what happened tonight, you might be exactly that type of person." She noted how he spoke, free of condescension or arrogance. His approach was measured, as if he anticipated her skepticism. "And you think I'm going to help you because?" she asked, trailing off. Her voice held a challenge. She had severed ties with officialdom a long time ago. Caldwell let out a slow breath. "Look, I know how messed up the system is. I know that the police letting you go so easily means someone very high up owes you or is protecting you. But I also know how dangerous Greer is. If you've got personal reasons to see him taken down, I can offer resources, intel, some measure of cover. But we'll keep it off the books. That's the only way to avoid half the city's corrupt power brokers tipping him off." Talia scanned the empty street, recalling how the Department of Defense had intervened on her behalf. She didn't know who had pulled strings for her this time. Maybe some old ally or a favor called in by one of her few remaining contacts. But Caldwell's approach seemed different than the usual bureaucrat. An uneasy truce formed in her mind. Lionel Greer was indeed a plague on the city, and though Talia's motivations were her own, she recognized that having an FBI agent with at least some genuine desire to stop Greer might be beneficial. "All right," she said at last, voice still guarded. "I'm not promising you anything, but if you dig up a way to corner Greer, I want to know." Caldwell nodded, as if he'd half expected her reluctance. "There's something brewing at the harbor. He's scheduling shipments of certain products. I'm going to keep digging. If you find anything on your end, I want us to share intel. We won't get many shots at Greer." Talia stared at him for a moment before turning away, ignoring the swirl of misty rain that began anew. "Find me when you're ready," she said over her shoulder. And with that, she vanished into the labyrinth of the streets, leaving Caldwell alone under the sputtering glow of the streetlight. Behind them, the precinct's windows flickered, revealing silhouettes of officers moving about. unaware that the city's underworld was about to be rocked by forces they barely comprehended. Hours before dawn, Lionel Greer stood behind the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, high above East Fall's skyline. The rain hadn't stopped, and rivulets of water streamed down the glass, distorting the view of the sprawling harbor in the distance. Greer was a tall man with impeccably styled salt and pepper hair and the bearing of a seasoned magnate. He wore a tailored navy suit, and a single gold watch flashed on his wrist under the subdued lighting of his luxury suite. Anyone meeting him for the first time might mistake him for a legitimate businessman, perhaps a philanthropist. Only a closer look at his hawkish eyes revealed the ruthlessness beneath. He dialed a number on his phone, eyes never leaving the endless city lights. On the other end of the line, a crisp female voice answered. "Mr. Greer," said the voice belonging to his personal assistant, Ava Riddell. "Your associates at the docks have concluded their nighttime shipments. No delays reported." Muddish Greer allowed a hint of satisfaction to twitch at the corners of his mouth. "Good. And the local authorities? Still on our payroll?" "Yes, sir. Commissioner Dale has assured us that any investigative eyes on the harbor will be limited. However, there was an odd incident tonight involving some police officers and a homeless woman. I checked the station logs after a tip from our contact. A few flags were raised regarding the Department of Defense stepping in." The mention of the Department of Defense made Greer's lips press into a thin line. His mind immediately went to old rumors, black ops, sealed records, and specialized agents who roamed off the grid. He'd spent years crafting an impenetrable network of corrupt officials, gang enforcers, and even high-level legal experts who laundered money for his operations. But what if some unpredictable ghost slipped through? He'd faced that possibility in the past. A mission in a foreign country that cost him a small fortune and half of his best men, all undone by a single specter of a soldier, rumored to be unstoppable. "Any identification on this woman?" he asked, forcing an even tone. He didn't want to betray the unease rattling inside him. If it was the same operative from years ago, he needed to act decisively. "Not official, but her name popped up in certain watch lists we maintain. She goes by Talia Moore, potentially ex-military. The details are murky, sealed behind clearance walls we can't breach," Ava reported. "She was released without charges after the Department of Defense intervened. That's never a good sign." Greer's grip tightened on the phone. He recalled rumors of an elite soldier rumored to have disrupted entire smuggling rings single-handedly. He had never confirmed it was Talia Moore by name, but a sense of recognition churned in his gut. "Keep me updated," he said curtly, "and arrange a meeting with Beck Montoya. I want him here tonight." Beck Montoya, an ex-Delta Force operative gone rogue, had been on Greer's payroll for a while. Montoya specialized in the kind of black market soldiering that cost a premium. He was as cunning as he was lethal, exactly the kind of person Greer relied on to eliminate threats that slipped through the usual cracks. Montoya was also rumored to have personal knowledge of certain ghosts from the specialized units he once served with. If Moore was the same phantom overshadowing Greer's nightmares, Montoya might be the only one capable of taking her out. After ending the call, Greer walked to a sleek bar in the corner of his penthouse. He poured himself a short glass of bourbon and sipped it slowly. The liquor burned his throat, but it steadied him, reminding him of the empire he'd built. The cargo ships at the harbor filled with illegal arms and human lives, the labyrinth of safe houses dotted across the city, and the politicians who owed him so many favors, they were effectively under his thumb. He had conquered every obstacle so far with a blend of strategic bribery, intimidation, and calculated violence. However, the mere possibility that Talia Moore was loose in Eastfall unsettled him in a way he detested. The recollection of a certain fiasco in South America years ago churned in his memory like a half-forgotten nightmare. He'd lost more men there than in any other operation, and if Moore had indeed survived, it meant his old ghosts were coming back to haunt him. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the polished floors of his penthouse with stark clarity. Greer made a silent vow. If Talia Moore had come to Eastfall, he would not underestimate her this time. The question remained, would even Beck Montoya's lethal skill set be enough to stop someone rumored to be unstoppable? Beck Montoya strode into Greer's penthouse later that night with the casual air of a man who'd seen far more lethal battlegrounds. He wore black tactical pants and a dark leather jacket, the faint smell of gun smoke clinging to him. A jagged scar on his right cheek hinted at past violence. Greer studied Montoya from across the marble floor, appreciating the controlled menace that radiated off him. Montoya was big but not bulky. Instead, he moved with a panther-like grace that always set others on edge. Ava guided Montoya to the private lounge area, where Greer waited with fresh drinks. Montoya declined the offered glass, his gaze scanning the opulent decor with mild disinterest. "You summoned me, Greer," he said, getting to the point. "I assume it's urgent since you had your assistant call at 3 in the morning?" Greer set his own drink down. "Talia Moore," he said simply. "I need to know if it's the same operative rumored to have demolished one of my biggest operations years ago. The details are fuzzy, but she's shown up on my radar again." Montoya's expression sharpened. "Moore? That name isn't common. If it's who I think it is, you've got a serious problem." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "When we were in Delta, there were legends about her. Ghost warfare, infiltration, high-value target elimination. If she's here and has eyes on you, you're in more danger than you realize." Greer nodded, steepling his fingers. "That's precisely why I brought you in. I want you to find her, flush her out, and eliminate the threat. Money is no object, but keep it quiet, or we'll have bigger fish than the FBI breathing down our necks." Montoya's scar twitched with a subtle grimace. "Be careful what you wish for, Greer. Moore's not an amateur. She won't be easy to corner. If you want to beat her, you'd better let me handle it my way. No micromanagement, no interference." Greer inclined his head. "Understood. I'll funnel you whatever intel I have. But keep me posted on the major developments. The FBI is sniffing around, but they're so tangled in corruption and red tape, they can't make a move without telegraphing it. Moore isn't shackled by that." Montoya smirked. "I assume you have eyes on the harbor and certain shipments that are critical to your bottom line. She'll probably hit you where it hurts most." Greer didn't respond directly. They both knew the conversation was about more than just weapons or contraband. Rumor had it that Greer's real money came from trafficking human beings. Desperate men, women, and even children shipped into the country under false pretenses. The harbor was central to that trade, and Moore's sense of lethal moral justice would drive her straight to it if she discovered what was happening there. A cold tension filled the luxurious penthouse. Montoya rose, slipping a black baseball cap onto his head. "I'll begin at dawn. Keep your phone close." With that, he turned and strode out, never once glancing back at Greer. Greer let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Montoya was the best weapon in his arsenal, a living embodiment of the lethal training the U.S. military once provided. If anyone could stand toe-to-toe with Talia Moore, it was Beck Montoya. And yet, in the back of his mind, a flicker of doubt remained. He recalled the whispered legends of Moore's unstoppable ferocity. He couldn't afford to let that doubt paralyze him. One mistake, and the empire he had so meticulously built would go up in flames. As he walked to the window again, nursing a fresh pour of bourbon, Greer stared out at the city lights. In the far distance, he could see the red beacons marking the harbor's tallest cranes. If Moore was indeed a ghost from his past, he would either bury her in the depths of the ocean or watch his own kingdom burn around him. The choice, he feared, might not be his alone to make. In a deserted warehouse near the outskirts of Eastfall, Talia Moore set up a makeshift camp. She had quietly slipped into the building, which was half collapsed from years of disuse, with broken windows that allowed the wind to whistle through jagged panes of glass. Amidst the rubble, she found a secure corner blocked off by a tangle of rusted shelving units. It was perfect, out of sight from anyone who might wander in, but with enough vantage points to watch the entrance. She clicked on a small battery-powered lantern and spread out a stolen city map, marking locations rumored to be tied to Lionel Greer's operations. Over the past few days, Talia had tapped into old contacts. Some she owed favors, others who owed her. A pattern emerged. Everything circled back to Blackridge Harbor. Certain warehouses were rumored to be used for storing contraband, and cargo ships often arrived with poorly documented shipments. Greer allegedly made fortunes on the black market, but no one was sure exactly how wide his net was. As she pieced the puzzle together, Talia recalled fleeting intel from her Delta days. The name Greer had shown up in an operation planning file she glimpsed while working overseas, connected to arms deals that fueled local uprisings. That alone was enough to merit suspicion, but she'd learned in hushed tones of even darker dealings. Trafficking in humans, turning desperate refugees into commodities. It was the kind of evil that made her blood boil. Years ago, her moral compass still pointed true, and she'd done everything she could to sabotage such operations. Now, out of uniform and official existence, she had only her well-honed skills to rely on. That was more than enough. In the corner of the warehouse, she kept a black duffel bag containing an array of weapons she'd acquired. Nothing too flashy, a compact handgun, a battered M4 carbine, and a few grenades she'd taken off unsuspecting gang members. She believed in traveling light and lethal. If she needed more specialized firepower, she could always scrounge or improvise. After all, a large part of her old training involved turning everyday objects into dangerous tools. Her mind wandered back to the policeman's baton smashing against her skull. She gingerly touched the bandage at her temple. The pain was a dull throb now, but it was a reminder of how quickly the facade of normalcy could evaporate. She also thought of Ethan Caldwell, the FBI agent who had approached her with an unexpected alliance. Was she wise to let a Fed into her orbit? She couldn't be sure of his integrity yet, but if he was investigating Greer, he might become an invaluable source of information. Another name surfaced in her mind, Beck Montoya. She'd heard rumors over the years about a skilled ex-Delta operator who'd gone private. Mercenaries from that lineage were often nightmares to face in the field. If Montoya was working for Greer, that meant Talia would likely encounter an adversary with training equal to her own. That possibility both alarmed and intrigued her. Delta Force operators were shaped by relentless discipline and a refusal to back down. If Montoya was just as unstoppable, their eventual clash could be deadly. The wind howled, rattling loose sheets of metal somewhere in the rafters, sounding eerily like distant gunfire. Talia checked her watch and decided to do one more sweep around the perimeter before trying to get any rest. She'd noticed a set of footprints by the warehouse's main door, perhaps another transient or a snooping local. She needed to ensure no one was watching her. Such vigilance was second nature by now, ingrained after so many missions where a single oversight meant certain death. Flicking off the lantern, she disappeared into the darkness, footsteps nearly silent as she made her rounds. 2 nights later, Talia decided to gather first-hand intel on the harbor. She arrived well after midnight, slipping past chain-link fences and avoiding the sporadic patrols by local thugs who seemed only half alert. The harbor stretched out before her like a steel forest, with towering cranes and rows of cargo containers stacked like giant bricks. The area was bathed in the harsh glow of floodlights and the tang of salt mixed with the metallic scent of shipping equipment. It was a place of perpetual motion, where trucks rumbled at odd hours and cargo ships groaned under the weight of their illicit payloads. Talia pressed herself against a shipping container, painted a dull blue, waiting patiently as a pair of armed guards wandered past. From her vantage, she counted at least 4 more roving patrols, each consisting of 2 to 3 men. They carried submachine guns, wore black hoodies or battered tactical gear, and lacked the disciplined formation of well-trained operatives. Likely, they were lower-level enforcers under Greer's payroll. A stack of crates near the water's edge caught her eye. The crates bore a poorly covered insignia that read, "Medical Supplies," though she doubted any legitimate use. Talia crept forward, stepping silently through puddles. Once close enough, she noticed the crates were sealed with heavy locks. She had a set of lockpicks ready, but a closer guard patrol forced her to hide behind a forklift, heart pounding with a controlled rhythm. Patience was the name of the game. Overreact, and the entire harbor would go on lockdown. Eventually, the guards drifted elsewhere, and Talia slipped back into the shadows. She reached another area where a small cargo vessel was moored. Its deck lights illuminated a group of men hurriedly moving something. Large sealed barrels, if she wasn't mistaken. She snapped a quick photo on a phone she'd modified for anonymity, zooming in on the ship's name, Arcadia's Grace. She'd cross-referenced that with Caldwell's intel. The men hissed instructions in terse voices, occasionally glancing over their shoulders. They were jumpy, which meant something big was happening soon. Talia debated sabotaging the crates or planting a tracer, but without more intel, it might tip Greer off prematurely. Instead, she memorized every detail. The positioning of cameras mounted on poles, the route the guards took, the vantage points from the crane walkways that overlooked the docks. Her plan was forming in her mind. Infiltration, sabotage, and extraction. She'd need a distraction large enough to sow confusion, giving her time to slip in, secure evidence, maybe even free any human cargo if it was on site, and vanish before the hired guns could corner her.